What is up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Rapflex Radio, the elite performance podcast where we believe an elite life is executed with purpose and love by design. I am your host, as always, Kyle Rapp, and I'm really excited to discuss this topic specifically in designing your training program and providing you guys a free plan at the end of this episode. And I started my training journey, if you will, not knowing anything really. I went with, I think I've told this story a few times, went with my college roommates, and we pretty much did the same circuit every time and started off with 35s on each side, and that was a struggle. And for so many years, I wish I could have had back if I would have implemented what I'm about to teach you today. So if you're in my position where you're just going to the gym, you're just exercising, there's no intention, and you feel like you're just going through the motions and you're not making the progress that you want to, stick around for this entire episode because I'm going to explain to you why that is and how to overcome that, and to give you a plan that I desperately wish I had in my hands back, when I was early 20s. So this episode is going to cover the foundation of designing a training program, the 4 areas of training improvement as I see it, advanced concepts, because I wouldn't be me if I just covered the basics, but we're going to cover a lot of the foundational work, and then what I call the Loyalist training program, which has a Marvel-esque reference to it. Okay, before I start, understand that if I spent 8 hours covering everything that would need to be covered in designing a training program, I wouldn't cover everything. So understand that there are things that I am not going to cover. I cover what I think is foundational for you to know as a first episode of me talking about this. Because the grand scheme, I want to do a body design complete episode covering training, nutrition, sleep, recovery at least once a month. This is a great way for me, I believe, to start the training part of it, is to give you guys, sorry I'm messing with my wire because you can see it. Oh well. So I want to start with the training here as a foundational episode, and then we can work our way towards more advanced concepts. So the foundation between training and exercise, because I recently just joined a Y, like the YMCA, and I am constantly reminded of the difference between training and exercise. And I understand everyone has different goals, don't get me wrong, but I would say 95% of people do not have these 3 things, because if they did, they'd be writing shit down, right? Intention, progressive overload, and short and medium range goals. Now that is 1 to 3 months. What I'm talking about is short to medium. A year is kind of your long goal and your ultimate sort of body composition or performance. That's kind of the ultimate goal. Really, it comes down to, are you intentional? Are you giving effort? Are you creating intensity when you're in a rep, when you're in a set? Are you actually progressing each week? Or are you doing the same thing and wondering why you're not looking any different? And do you actually have goals that you've set out? Say, hey, week 4, I want to reach this. Week 1, this is what I'm doing. This is what I need to do in the subsequent weeks. If you're not doing those things, there's a reason why you haven't reached the goals that you want to, or you've plateaued. So within this, I want to cover 2 specific concepts, and it's the training microcycle and then compound to isolation progression, which I don't see a lot. So I want you guys to avoid the mistakes that are being performed, if you will. So with most training programs, we see a 4 to 6 week microcycle focused on what's called progressive overload. So I kind of described it beforehand, but this is a more visual example for those who are listening on or watching on YouTube. For those who are listening, I've got week 1, say 135 pounds, say it's a bench press. We're going 3 sets of 10 reps. Week 2, we're going to increase that weight by 10 pounds. So week 2, we're at 145 for 3 sets for 10 reps. Week 3, we are at 155 pounds, 3 sets, 10 reps. What increases each week is dependent on your goals, but weight is key. Now, if you're not progressing weight each week, but the quality of the reps are getting better, you're getting more full range of motion, you're getting the more what's called a mind-body connection where you actually feel the muscle contracting, that is progress as well. But for the purposes of this discussion, when we're talking about progressive overload and we actually see data that's increasing, quantitative-wise, this is what we're talking about. So the last 3 years I've been very intentional with progressive overload and tracking mostly everything, specifically compound weights, but when we get into the middle and isolation work, it's not as important, but it's still important. You should still do it. But if you're exhausted, forget, definitely keep track of the compound lifts. And I'll explain why here in a second. But I've been focused on that for probably the past 3.5, 4 years, and it's made all the difference in the world because I actually have tracked and actually have data to say, hey, I've gone from here to here, and now where I'm at now, I can pretty much guess where I'm going to be at the end and work my ass off towards those numbers. And yes, it's an ego thing too, but it also is going to push you forward in the correct direction. And what I don't see a lot, and this is when I see someone enter the gym, then the first thing they do is bicep curls, and I have to laugh. And sure, there are many schools of thought. Here's why you should do compound lifts first. It is simple muscle recruitment equation. Deadlifts, for instance, is a compound movement that works glutes, hamstrings, traps, lats, I could go on. Bicep curls, on the other hand, work the 3 muscles in the bicep, and that's it. Do you think that you're going to need more energy for executing a deadlift versus the bicep curls? The answer is yes. So this is why you should do A, warm-up sets, but B, your compound lifts first, because you have that energy and muscle glycogen storage to execute on those bigger lifts versus hopping right in with the bicep curls. And I laugh because I've probably done it before way back in the day, but just understand that this is going to be huge, and this is a part of training design, and it's having intention of going in with a specific progression of exercises. And with the plan I'm going to give you for free, it's got all this built in, so you won't have to worry about it. But when you go to do your next 4 to 6 week cycle, you'll understand why that's so important. Now, the 4 areas of what I call training improvement, and this is what I've seen. People want to be stronger, they want better aesthetics, they want to perform better in either life or a sport, and longevity. There's something called the Centenarian Olympics, where 100-year-olds do like a goblet squat and picking up a baby, for instance. And Peter Attia talks about this, so I'm not, absolutely not the pioneer of this, but that is an actual thing that I'm not going to ignore. But the 3 things I do want to cover are A, the athlete, the bodybuilder, and the powerlifter, because if you're listening to this show and have aspirations of being 100 and doing the things that 100-year-olds will be badass at doing, a lot of what I'm going to cover will fall into that too. So, an athlete, we call this the field of strength and conditioning. The idea for an athlete is to increase strength conditioning performance based on the sport or activity. Golf strength and conditioning looks dramatically different than football. That looks dramatically different than basketball because of the different demands of each sport and what it requires from the body. And this is where I'm upgrading my understanding of biomechanics, rotational movements. This is where kind of I'm nerding out in the next probably month or two, is understanding biomechanics. I was really hoping my graduate studies would have a biomechanics class, but it wasn't offered, or strength and conditioning. I have to learn that stuff on my own. But understand that the movement patterns of a golfer and the conditioning of a golfer is dramatically different than a basketball player. Golfers aren't jumping. Yeah, no, they're not jumping. Basketball players are. So you have to take that into equation with a myriad of other things. So that's strength and conditioning. The bodybuilder is mostly, not all, mostly concerned with aesthetics, muscle definition, and muscle separation. If you're going into a bodybuilding competition, they are judged based on aesthetics, but I believe strength is a primary block to the eventual aesthetic look, obviously along with nutrition. And the plan I'm going to give you is I would say, mostly a bodybuilding style plan. Although the way I'm going to market it to you, it covers the big three, which powerlifters are into. But I believe that having a strong big three is going to allow you to get the aesthetics that you want here eventually. I'll explain more of that. And then the powerlifter competes in the bench, squat, and deadlift, and is mostly concerned with these three lifts. I am biased towards bodybuilding. Understand that. So I have a certain lack, not a certain lack of respect for powerlifters, but it just seems like they're only concerned with just these three, and aesthetics are out the window. I just find that crazy when you could do all four. So, Body Design Complete by WrapFlex Performance incorporates all four of these areas: strength, aesthetics, performance, and longevity. So we're not killing you every week, every training session, with your mind or with your goals in mind, without sacrificing overall health or your favorite foods, because it's 2021 and I have to say that. Moving on, so I want to cover some advanced concepts. So I covered the foundational work. Even if you just apply those two things, you get more intentional about a microcycle. You start with compound lifts and then progress your way to isolation, which is bicep curls. If you're just isolating triceps, biceps, glutes, quads, calves, progressing to that point, that's going to make a world of difference, and I wish I was told that earlier. But I want to cover some advanced concepts because they're going to show up in the training plan if you so optly choose to use it. So what I'm going to cover in the advanced concepts are rep ranges and intensity, supersets, and then what's called an FST-7 set finishers. Rep ranges. Now, there's a lot of nuance here, so asterisk here. So 1 to 5 reps is typically for strength, and I'll cover RPE and 1 rep max here in a second. But the focus on the 1 to 5 is to basically see how much weight that you can do in that 1 to 5 set. 6 to 12 is typically muscle growth, is where we see that. And with RPE, 1 rep max, we're usually at about a 7-8 on the RPE, which is your own personal exertion percentage between 1 to 10. Now there is another RPE scale that goes, I think, from 7 to 16. We're going to ignore that. So 1 to 10 is much easier to remember. So say you're doing one set of 12 reps of an ease bar bicep curl. The weight that you should choose is, let's say, 60 to 70% of your 1 rep max. So say you can do 100 pounds on the ease bar, drop that down to about 50, 60, and then you should be able to do 12 reps of that. And we should see muscle growth because of the volume that that particular exercise has within it if you do enough reps and sets. So I'm not going to go straight into how much volume you need each week. That's for a subsequent episode. I couldn't cover everything. And then 13 plus is usually for what's called muscle endurance. And again, that's, for me, that's the gray area. It's kind of hard to explain. And there's a lot of finishers that will go beyond 12, but it's still, the idea is for muscle growth. So I talked about RP and 1 rep max. Your RPE is going to come with a lot of experience and getting under the bar and actually lifting and seeing what feels heavy and what feels light, and you'll gain that awareness through actually doing it. 1 rep max you can actually test, and don't test it every week. Maybe every month, test your 1 rep max. So bench press, say you can do 265 one time, and then you base the RPE off of what that 1 rep max is, and then you can subsequently say, hey, week 1, this is where I'm going to be at. Week 2, week 3, week 4, this is what I'm shooting for, and this is how much I want to grow. Understand that nutrition, sleep, and recovery play a vital role in this, but training design is super important. Next is the concept of supersets. Supersets are performing 2 exercises back to back with little to no rest in between. An example is an ease bar bicep curl, and then SS is short for superset, skull crushers. So with this, you're working the bicep muscle, and then you're laying flat on a bench or vertical. I prefer flat, and doing skull crushers, which works your tricep muscle. This concept will speed up your training, especially if you were trying to do a lot of things individually. I know that probably you don't want to spend 2 hours in the gym, so the plan I have you on shouldn't have you in the gym more than an hour and 15 minutes. And we utilize these supersets to speed up training and optimally use the same piece of equipment for both exercises, as to not be a jackass in the gym running around like a circuit training crazy person. I've seen that before. So most of my supersets are with the same piece of equipment or same bench, so that you don't feel like a jackass. This really helps just if you feel like badass too, when you do 24 reps and then you have a subsequent rest period, then you go at it again. And again, these are usually, supersets are usually your isolation exercises, because it's very taxing to do a superset with compound lifts, but people do it. I'm not saying it's out of the question. So FST-7 sets or fascia stretch training, and I would Google this for more information, but I'll explain in the training program how to execute it. But as a final exercise is what's called a finisher. We do 7 sets of typically 12, and the idea behind this is you do a set and then you pretty much flex whatever that muscle is and pump nutrients, oxygen, vitamins, minerals into that muscle, and it has potential to recruit more anabolic hormones to the targeted muscle. Usually this is biceps, triceps, quads, calves. I believe that's what I have set for the training program. To explain finishers from an overview standpoint, there's something called an AMRAP, which is as many reps as possible. Cody McBroom teaches, I'm sure other people do, but EDT is escalated density training. And then FST-7 sets, I'm blanking on the guy who actually invented this, but I believe this is a great way to increase intensity at the end, and you feel like a badass. I wouldn't be myself if I didn't include some sort of mindset stuff in this. But for me, it makes the most sense for this particular training program, and I've seen tremendous success with using this style of finisher. So I wanted to pass it on in this training program as well. So that covers a few advanced concepts. Now I will cover some more advanced concepts, some more foundational concepts here later in the episodes, but I want to kind of explain the Loyalist training program. It is named after Bucky and Okoro. I think I'm saying that right. I really should have listened to some YouTube videos, but she's from Black Panther. She's the general. And why am I giving this away for free? I wish I had this training program when I started a couple years in. When you first start out, you're getting the hang of things. You're intimidated. You don't know exactly how everything works, but about 6 months to a year in, you start to understand what's going on. From that point, I believe that this plan would be perfect for beginner to intermediate to possibly advanced, depending on where you're at. Now, this is a male and female program. Nothing has been changed. Some of the programs that I do, they do change male-female, but I'm keeping this sort of set. And you'll not only get the plan, but wait, there's more. You'll also get few emails from me explaining sort of more in-depth nuance with what I have covered in there and why they are the way they are. Because as the Marvel nerd that I am, there are some things like a military press. I have you do one set extra because we're calling it the Loyalist, and they're both like diehard military loyalists, as it were. So there's just some fun training program design along with the lore of Marvel. And I'll also explain like why certain things are the way they are. But the details and overview of the Loyalist, it is a 4-day upper-lower split, and eventually I'll go into like what is a push-pull leg versus upper-lower versus anterior and posterior, which blew my mind. That's a thing. But I think 4 days is optimal. 5 is great too. 3, you're pushing it. 6 is too much, in my opinion. 1's obviously not enough. This is actually focused on improving the big 3, bench, squat, and deadlift. And don't get me wrong, it will help your aesthetics tremendously, especially with the FST-7 at the end. But there's also accessory movements to help the big 3, like you're pretty much inverting lat pull downs, and you'll see this in the program. And it's basically flipping the bench on its head and then working the muscle that you need to strengthen to push better. For example, there are other things that are going to help your squat and deadlift that aren't just squatting and deadlifting more. And I saw my plateau go away when I did this program. And it was one of the biggest things that I was super proud of. I did this last year. I'm currently doing it right now to get back into it. And it has, like I've said, like I've covered, it has a powerful finisher, the FST-7 sets, and I'll explain how to execute that within the training program. So, if you're stuck, if you feel stuck, if you feel like there's more you could do in the gym and you're not, and you don't know what the next step is, this is the perfect plan for you. And I hope this gave you some, ideas or nuggets to why you may be in a plateau, why you might be stuck with your training, and hopefully this will help you going forward if you don't decide to do this training program, but you go on to start to be more intentional with doing what it is that you want to do. So you will find the training program in the show notes. You'll also find it here very soon on my Instagram as an opt-in. I would love for you to download the plan. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm easily reachable at my email at kyle@rapflex.com. If you have any questions whatsoever, again, I'll be sending you some emails to explain some of the nuance. And this was just a way for me to kind of put a program out into the world and see what people thought of it. And I'm really excited to share it with you because I had a lot of positive results doing it. I'm excited for you to dive in if you so choose. So thank you again for joining me on another episode over at Flex Radio, and I will talk to you next week.